the trail ruins have a dark secret, as this brand new structure reveals that... And so, let's begin. Our story begins rather recently, only a few thousand years ago. But despite this not being all that long ago, it was a very different time for the overworld, as it was a time when the villagers were suffering endlessly, as they'd been at war with the pillagers for the past several decades, and well, at this point, there was no hope of victory for them, as billions were dead, millennia of knowledge had been stolen, and millions of villages had been burnt down to the ground. It was devastating, and as such, the villagers as a species were beginning to regress, losing the once prestigious title they held as the overworld leaders, and instead becoming a much more primitive species, one that had to rely on basic farming to survive. And so, for the villagers, life was hard, and life was short. And well, due to those facts, to many there just wasn't a reason to push on, to continue fighting, as really, in the long term, they were just going to lose. But it was at that point, when all hope seemed lost, that something happened. Something that would turn the tides of this war in the villagers' favour. As it was on one sunny morning that a group of brave young villagers decided that they had had enough of all this, and that they wanted this war to be over right now, and for the villagers to win it, and they were willing to sacrifice everything to do that. But how exactly were they planning to do it? Well, their plan was to go out and explore the world, attempting to uncover any lost technology that the villagers might have lost during this century-long war. And then, once they had found it, they believed that they should be able to fight back far more efficiently, and hopefully would be able to kill the pillagers. As they did know that in the past, the villagers were once the greatest beings in the overworld and had very advanced technology. And so, because they believed that, they thought that remnants of that technology must be out there in their world. Now, although this plan wasn't the most thought through, nor was it likely to be a success, it did give the villagers hope. Hope that they would win. And it was with that hope that these young villagers were motivated to begin their exploration. However, all the motivation in the world wouldn't be enough to prepare these younglings on the hardships that they were going to have to face over the next few years. As many nights during the exploration, they would have to go to bed hungry, as they couldn't forage enough food, and so because of that, many would starve to death. They also had to spend a lot of time defending themselves from the creatures of the dark, and well, many of them failed to do that, and thus, even more were killed. Also, they had to traverse through very tough landscapes, from massive mountains to deep valleys, both of which were extremely hard on the villagers. But still, they persevered, and never stopped moving. And luckily, all those sacrifices would be worth it, as on one sunrise, they found it. An ancient piece of technology. They all instantly began celebrating, jumping up and down, excited that, with this, they were finally going to win that war. But as quickly as they began to celebrate, they stopped. As, well, yes, this was clearly a piece of very advanced technology. They had no idea how to use it, or even what it was. So, it was kind of worthless. And then they realized something. They just sacrificed everything for nothing. This message was hard to take for those explorers, but still, they decided not to give up, and to just get closer and examine their technology to see if they could learn how it worked. But as they began to walk closer to it, it suddenly activated, and a trap was set off, which caused a massive explosion, which thankfully didn't hurt anyone, but it did reveal something unexpected. A giant city. This was not what they had come for, but maybe the city was their answer. Maybe the city was where this technology had come from. And so they began to feel hopeful. And it was with this newfound hope that they all began to run into that city, excited for the secrets that it might hold. And well, there certainly were a lot of them. As it would be over the next few hours that those explorers would walk through that city, rediscovering much of these ancient pieces of technology from long ago. As well as that, they also found instructions that they could actually read on how these pieces of technology worked. It was amazing. This tech was so advanced and so powerful, and so, in their minds, if they could just get these back to the villagers, they were going to win this war 100%. And so, once they had gathered all that they could possibly hold, they began to exit the city. But as they were doing that, something caught their attention. It was a glowing blue rock. They were confused, and so they all decided to take a slight detour to investigate it. And when they got up close to this strange blue rock, they saw that it was an armatrim. They had never seen one of those before, and so they all began to walk closer to them to pick them up, when simultaneously they all began to have a vision. They could see the ancient city, except it was different. It wasn't underground and in ruins. Instead, it was on the surface and was in pristine condition. And more than that, it was inhabited by none other than the villagers and the pillagers. They were working together. How strange. But then, things began to speed up as a blue monster rose from the ground and began killing them all. And so very quickly, many of the villagers and pillagers began fleeing the city. And they could see that most of them were running out of the cities, whilst others were jumping through these strange portals. They could see a fiery forest through one of the portals, where some of them went, and strange floating rocky islands where the others went. This just doesn't make any sense. There's no other dimensions, they thought. But still, they continued with the vision, where they saw more detail on those rocky islands, and the villagers that went to them, as they watched them travel across these rocky islands, where they eventually found cities. They were purple and were incredibly detailed. It was amazing. They had never seen anything like that before. But then their vision suddenly shifted back to the overworld, where they saw a flashing of all these different armatrims, and then they saw that same blue creature running towards them with its arms up in the air, looking like it was about to attack them. And then their vision ended. That was very strange, but also very interesting, as maybe it was that technology that caused the city to become what it is today, and maybe they should just leave that technology here, as it might doom them. They weren't sure, but as they couldn't see any blue monster around, they assumed that it must have been something else, and so it was then that they decided to just leave with all of this technology that they had picked up. However, the moment they took their first steps to get away, the entire city lit up in blue, and the monster burrowed its way out of the ground, as the skulk had just been awoken. All the explorers began to run as fast as they could away from the city, and well, many failed and died. But at the same time, luckily, many of them are able to get out and are safe. And so after experiencing that traumatic event, the remaining explorers decide to head back to the villages, ready to share all their discoveries. However, when they get back into those villages, all the villagers believe that they are lying. As to them, there is just no way that the villagers and the pillagers could have been working together peacefully, and that no villagers could have ever built that massive city. And so, to them, all of those pieces of technology must just be fakes, and that these villagers must be conspiring with the pillagers to take them down. And so, it was due to that the explorers were banished from the villages. They were shocked to hear that, as they had just sacrificed so much and had lost so many friends, all for nothing. No, this wasn't right. It wasn't going to end like that. And so they were now determined to show all the villagers that they weren't lying, and they were telling the truth, and they truly do want to help. And they were planning on doing that by creating their own brand new civilization, one that would be much greater than the villagers ever were. And so it was with that they began on the construction of what would later become known as the Trails. Now, the Trails were small cities that were designed to be like a miniature city maze that would be extremely hard to traverse through if someone was invading, making their city safer during attacks, as due to the maze-like structure of the city, only the residents would know how to get around the city and would know the best places to hide. Also, for further defense, they used those armor trims that they had found, which when dipped in their mud blocks allowed for them to create their own custom designs for their armor, which scared any attacker away. And these cities would also be built in an architectural style inspired by that of what they saw in their visions of what we know today as the End Cities. Furthermore, to show off how advanced their cities were, they were built out of almost entirely mud bricks and terracottas, both of which were deemed as very rare and valuable by the villagers. Also, the paths in their cities would be made out of stone and stone bricks, which not only looked much nicer, but were far more durable than that of the path blocks that were being used by the villagers. As for the lighting of the trails, well, they used candles, which is what the people in the ancient city used to light up their homes, and they quite liked it. Also, within the trails, they had far more efficient farms than anywhere else in the world, as they, thanks to their technology, had access to bone meal. And so it was at this point that things were looking quite good for the Trail civilization, as they had strong defended cities, beautiful structures, and plenty of food, as well as much more technology than any other civilization. And so it would be quite fair to say that life was actually quite good in those trails. In fact, it was so good that many villagers began to flee the villages to join them, as life in the trails was just exponentially better. And so this meant, over the next few decades, the trails grew exponentially, becoming larger and larger, as well as becoming more commonplace in the world, as it didn't take too long for there to be over 1,000 of these trail cities scattered across the world, being inhabited by millions. And so, for anyone who lived in those trails, life continued to be great, far greater than anything that would have been possible within the villages. And it was only getting better, as with the rediscovery of many of those ancient pieces of technology, defense was only becoming better in those trails, and life was only getting easier. And so it's because of that the inhabitants of the trails no longer had to spend so much time worrying about attacks and just basic survival. And so instead, they could spend their time on other things, such as learning about the world and making works of art, of which they did a lot, as they made millions of pieces of pottery, as pottery was a very popular art form within the trail cities. And so because of that, there were hundreds of unique different designs of the decoration pot used all throughout the city, all of which were loved by the inhabitants. Additionally, due to their constant safety, the society within the trails could also focus more on trade, which they did a lot of, making the trails very rich, as they were now able to hold massive supplies of emeralds, gold, and iron, all as a result from the trades. In fact, because of this, the trails had become the wealthiest and most powerful society for quite some time in the overworld. And it looked as if, on the surface, there would be nothing that could stop them from progressing. Well, almost nothing. As far, far away, the leaders of the villages were beginning to plot an attack against the trails, as they had grown envious and jealous of their successes, and they wanted things to change, as the leaders wanted the villagers to become what the trails were, rich and safe, and they wanted the villagers to become the greatest civilization in the world once again. And well, just as luck would have it, the pillagers were currently being distracted, as they too wanted to attack the trails, and so they weren't focusing on the villagers, which meant that they finally had an opportunity to strike onto the trails without being attacked themselves. And so because of that, large armies of villagers all across the world began marching to the trails and began to attack. Now, this should have led to the villagers being defeated, as the trails had far more advanced defenses and were much better at attacking. But still, they somehow lost. How? Well, the pillagers saw the villagers getting ready for their attack onto the trails, and they decided to aid them, as in their mind, if they could defeat the trail civilization, then after they were gone, the pillagers could rule the world, becoming the dominant power in the overworld for the rest of eternity. And so, with that, the rampage began. The trail cities were being burnt down and plundered, and although they were able to put up quite a fight to defend their homes, it wasn't enough, and soon every trail civilization member was killed, and their homes were left in ruins. Now, after the victory, the villagers returned to their cities and stole many pieces of ancient technologies, such as the stone cutter, the blast furnace, and composters, all of which they hoped to benefit from. But once they took what they wanted, they banned any other villagers from entering the trails. And thus, from that moment onwards, no villager would ever go into those trails, as they would never go against their orders. Meanwhile, as for the pillagers, they went back into their cities not long after the villagers, and they stole everything else that they saw, and they returned those goods back to their bases. And then, after that, there would be no reason for the pillagers to return to the trails, as they had taken everything they wanted. And so, due to the fact that neither the pillagers nor the villagers would ever return to the trails, it didn't take too long before they were completely forgotten. But wait, its story does not end just yet, as not everything was taken from those trails, as some pieces of their history remain still within those cities, such as their candles, their unique armor trims, and their shards of pottery, as some artifacts just weren't spotted during any of the city raids. And so it would be over the next few thousand years, as sand, gravel, and dirt would pile onto the trail ruins, that those artifacts would be buried within. Now, luckily, most of them wouldn't be destroyed, as typically they were just fused with the sand, as that was a very soft material and it was very common within these trail ruins. But still, this doesn't matter, as the trail ruins are rapidly being consumed by the land around them, and so it won't be too long until the ruins are lost forever, never to be found again. And so if you, yes, you want to uncover the secrets of the trail ruins and learn about their past firsthand, then you need to go now and start exploring your world, as you don't have much time left, as only the top parts of the tallest buildings within the trail ruins remain visible today. But wait, before you go searching in the world, there is something that you must also know about that civilization, as that civilization, well, they were very close to being able to do something just amazing, that being to resurrect a dinosaur. Now, hold on, that sounds crazy, but be aware of that, as when you go looking in the world, trying to reveal the secrets of all the suspicious blocks that you come across, you might very well find an ancient dinosaur egg. But to learn how and why those dinosaur eggs got to where they are today, then you'll need to watch this video, and trust me, it's quite a unique story.